Okay, let's pray. We thank you, most loving, good and gracious God, that you have not abandoned us, but that you have abandoned your Son. We thank you that he has taken upon himself our sin, our shame, our guilt, and our trouble, so that we might share in his righteousness. We pray today that you will give us your Holy Spirit to guide and lead us, so that we may join with your Son in praising your most holy name and what you've done to justify us. Glory be to you, our one and only living God. Amen. Psalm 22. Just to remind you of what is going. It's most fortuitous that this is the psalm for the week in chapel, in case you hadn't noticed. At least the second part is the vow of praise and the invitation to the banquet. Okay, Psalm 22, for the director of the choir, to the doe of mourning. That's the particular, probably the musical setting, belonging to David. Right? So it's one of those Davidic psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why, understood, are you far from saving me? The words of my groaning. Oh my God, I call by day, but you do not answer, and by night without relief. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One, the praise of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. Fathers in the sense of ancestors. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried for help and they were saved. In you they trusted and they were not disappointed. But I'm a maggot and not a man, scorned by humanity and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They curl their lips, they wag their heads. He rolled it over to Yahweh. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, since he delights in him. Yet you cut me from the womb, entrusting me to the breasts of my mother. Upon you I was cast from the womb of my mother. You've been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls surround me, strong bulls of Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths against me like a lion that tears its prey and roars. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it has melted away within my innards. My tongue is dried up like a piece of pottery. No, my strength, is dried up, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You put me like a pot in the dust of death. Probably the idea is a broken pot, not an intact pot. Truly dogs surround me. A company of evildoers move around me. They've pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look. They stare at me. They divide my clothes among them and cast lots for my cloak. But you, O Yahweh, do not be far away. O my strength, come quickly to help me. Deliver my nephew, my throat. Bowl. Can you see this? The most immediate meaning there, because you have the sword to the throat. My precious life, understood, from the hand of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion, and answer me from the horns of wild oxen. I will declare your name, that's Yahweh, to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will praise you. You who fear Yahweh, praise him. All you seed of Jacob, glorify him and revere him, all you seed of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of his afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried out to him for help. From you is, or perhaps even will be, if you take the next part here, and that's probably gives a clearer sense, will be my praise in the great assembly. Before those who fear you, I will fulfill my vows. Now come a number of either imperfects or jussives. I see them as jussives, may or let, but it can also be future tense, a promise. And that's the way many translations take it. But I don't think it makes as good sense as if they are jussives and therefore invitations. So we get a series of invitations here. Let the poor eat and be satisfied. Let those who seek him praise Yahweh. May your heart always have life. That's their word of praise. Let all the ends of the earth remember and return to Yahweh. Let all the families of the nations perform prostration before him. For kingship belongs to Yahweh, and he is the ruler over the nations. Let all the fat ones of the earth eat and perform prostration. Let all who go down to the dust bow before him, each one who has not kept his soul alive, or who cannot keep his soul alive, his nephesh, his throat alive. Let seed, now posterity, their seed or our seed, or it means future generations basically, posterity, descendants. Let their seed, their descendants, serve him. Let it be told about the Lord to the coming generation. Now there's two possibilities, so that they may proclaim as his vindication to a people yet unborn that he has done it. Right, that Yahweh has done it is the vindication of the afflicted one. Or the other possibility, equally possible, and probably this is the way most translators take it, so that they may proclaim his righteousness, his vindication. That's the afflicted one's righteousness, not Yahweh's righteousness now. To a people yet unborn, saying, he has acted. Who's acted? Yahweh has acted. But a rather long psalm, and a very fascinating, puzzling psalm that has always given trouble to exegetes to the present day. Okay, now it quite obviously is an individual lament and a complaint. At least that's the way it starts off with. But there are three features that don't fit the normal individual lament complaint pattern. Three features that are very important. Now, always, if you're going to understand any piece of art, whether it is music or poetry or drama or anything, you really got to appreciate it. You need to understand the form that's employed and what's expected, what's conventional. Now, the particular force of a piece of art is the departures from the expected pattern. So there's an expected pattern, there's a usual pattern, and then you get a departure from it. By the way, that's the way jokes work. You set things up, and then you get a twist at the end. So art works very much the way a joke works. You have something that's expected, and then there is a twist, the unexpected. Now, what are the unexpected features, the unusual features here? Now, normally in an individual lament, you would expect, as is in one part of the Psalms, God's dealing with the individual in the past. But here the focus is on God's dealing with Israel, and that should give us a signal that this person is not just a private Joe here. It's someone who occupies a national office. The second feature is that instead of a call to invitation to a Thanksgiving and a Thanksgiving meal, offering and a Thanksgiving meal, which normally happens after God hears the prayer of a person, then you fulfill your vow by presenting thank offerings and inviting your family and friends. Instead of the vow of thanksgiving, here you have the vow of praise. Praise. And that's one of the forms of the psalm we're going to look at, and that's the normal kind of song that's sung every day. Now, praise always is not individual, personal. It's not thanking God for what he has done to you, but praise is lauding God for what he is and what he has done for the nation. So the focus there in praise is national rather than personal. And then most stunningly, you get these amazing invitations to a meal, a holy meal, which is part of the divine service that this culminates in. Not a Thanksgiving meal, a little Thanksgiving meal, but an amazing banquet to which all people, living and dead, future generations, are invited to participate. A meal of praise. Now, lastly, right from already before the New Testament, this psalm was understood in the Jewish tradition as prophetic, in the sense that this doesn't describe anything that has happened in the past in Israel or that could happen in the present in Israel, but it was a prophecy about what would be at some time in the future. And since it's Davidic, there was always the question, is this in fact not just, does it have to do with the end times? Right? It's eschatological. And one of the Jewish traditions is that the person who's lamenting here is Israel, who, even though God punishes Israel, in the last day will be vindicated at the resurrection. Theology of Daniel, if you like. Right? So therefore a prophetic psalm pointing to what God will do for his people in the age to come. Not in this age, the age to come.
So it's not specifically messianic?
Well, there's some debate. And it's very hard to trace that within the Jewish tradition because this was such a Christian psalm. You know, the two basic Old Testament texts for Christians were Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. And the next very important one was Psalm 110. They were the, if you like, the foundational texts for Christian teaching of Jesus the Messiah. And so, in a sense, the Jews, when they had to counteract Christian propaganda, that's from their point of view, Christian preaching, had to give a non-messianic interpretation to it. And so they say Isaiah 53, for example, doesn't speak about the Messiah who's to come, but speaks about Israel and only about Israel. See the way it works? And that's the way it's basically understood by Jewish scholars to the present day. Likewise, this psalm. But there is some dispute because it doesn't fit. That interpretation is a little forced. Okay, but you need to understand and respect that tradition. Now, there are a number of interesting features here. Now, First of all, there is inclusion. This is bracketing. Now, inclusion operates by the repetition of words and phrases which mark off, if you like, sections. Now, some of you have referred to it, but I don't know whether you understand the way it works and what it is. You can't talk about inclusion in terms of content, ideas, but it has to be actually something you hear. It's an oral device, and it's a classical preacher's, communicator's device. You know, I introduce a paragraph with a sentence, and then I wrap it up by basically repeating what I said at the beginning. And that signals, okay, you can't hear paragraphing the way you can do when you're reading. So what's the paragraphing device when you speak? Is repetition. And you see, so music always works this way. Ties back to something that's gone before. Not all music, but that's a classical music device. You get these words that bracket off sections, be far, be far, be far, 3 times. The first introducing and then concluding a first section and then concluding a second section. You get answer, introducing the lament and closing off the lament. My God, introducing the first part of the lament and closing the first part of the lament. Likewise, deliver, opening the second part of the lament and closing the third part of the lament. And then that last part you get the word seed, posterity, closing off that last section. Now bracketing it together. Then there's framing, which is similar to this, but instead of framing is this way, okay, inclusion is this kind of thing, bracketing in this way. Framing is repetition, but instead of opening and closing, it is repeating something to open 2 new sections. They surround, right? So you get repetition again. And in this case, it doesn't signal the close of a paragraph, if you like, but the opening of a new part of that particular speech, that spoken word. You get that there. And then I've just listed some of the key words that recur several times, and quite often with slightly different shades of meaning. There's play on them. Okay, now, at the end of this section today, I want to return to you your work on Psalm 25, and in connection with that analysis, I want to just point out to you how I go about analysing the structure of a psalm like this, which is very complex. And if you're going to make sense of it, you need to see the way it's built up. Okay, now one of the questions you ask when you want to work out the structure of the psalm is who is addressed? Who speaks to whom about what? Or the other thing is about what does the psalmist speak with? So you get the change of address or the change of topic. So just by change of address. Now, I can talk to you, Sam, and Sam, did you have a good night last night? Okay, that's one form of address. Or I can speak about Sam and saying, Sam's looking very miserable this morning. Can you tell me what's wrong with him, please, Greg? I can talk about him or I can talk to him. Can you see? And it's a significant different mode of address. And sometimes you can talk to yourself. Now, they mark very important transitions, especially in Psalms, that change of focus. And, when you address or speak about somebody, you can do all sorts of different statements. I can ask a question. Sam, did you sleep well last night? Question. Or I can make a remark. Sam, you're looking lousy this morning. Right? Now, different forms of speech have different functions. Can you understand what function is? And you need to pin this down. And a lot of you have great difficulty to see the function of different kinds of speech. Now, this is very important, not just for exegesis of Psalms, but exegesis generally. And it's going to be important for your teaching and preaching, because you always want to do something. You're not just putting things out there, but you need to achieve something, and you need to be aware of what you're doing. Now, okay, let's have a look at the way this psalm is worked. Just by looking at the question of to whom does the psalmist speak and about what? It begins 1 and 2 with speaking to God about the reason for his abandonment of the psalmist. And it is a complaint. Why have you forsaken me? Why? Okay? It's speaking to God, complaining to God about his abandonment. And then you get a change, and you go speaking about God. So instead of addressing God, you speak about God to your audience or to yourself. Okay, so you're speaking... Oh, no. See, you still speak to God. Sorry. I've jumped ahead. About God's deliverance of his ancestors in the past. And this is a confession of faith to God. It's not a complaint. Complaining starting off, yet our ancestors trusted in you. You delivered them. That's a confession of faith, which is very close to a kind of praise of God. And then you get a change of focus. No longer speaking to God, but there's no clear audience here. There's a complaint about the psalmist being mocked by people. All who see me mock at me, they stare at me, etc. Lamenting his situation. And then there's address of God again for his past provision to him, confession of faith that God took him from the womb and entrusted him to his mother. And then that culminates in the first petition. Now, look for the expected. After at least a complaint, confession of faith, lament, confession of faith, petition, what would you expect after the petition? What with them? Praise, vow of praise. But the unexpected now is the switch repetition of this section here. After that first petition to God, you get 2 further laments. There's a lament about the menace of wild animals and the fact that God has buried him in the dust of death. And then there's a lament about the menace of the hunters with the dogs. And that culminates in 5 petitions that go back to the situation that's described here. 5 petitions of to be rescued from the wild animals, the dogs, the hunters, and even God. Right, 5 petitions. Notice there 1 petition, then 5 petitions. And notice the way things are built up here. There's a kind of a stepping up, if you like the structure. You start off with a complaint, a lament, confession of faith about what God did to Israel, the ancestors. You'd expect then maybe a petition, but then you go back. Instead of complaint, you get lament, confession of faith, and the first petition. And then you get going back again to this element, lament, and then finally 5 petitions. Can you see there's a kind of a stepping down or stepping up extension here, the way it works structurally? You all see that there? So it's a kind of a zigzag. You go, and then you go back, you go, and then you go back, and then you go finally to where you want to end up with? Yes?
Sure, God is listening.
Righto, this is pretty persuasive speech. And it's brilliant rhetoric, if you like, just in terms of communication. And then part 2, you get four different changes of address. Verse 22 is addressed to God and is a vow or promise of praise. And this is these are Hebrew. No, this is English now. Okay, I'm sorry to muddle you up. Okay, I'm not consistent, am I? Thank you for picking up. Then you have the address to the congregation about the praise. There's a call to praise. You who fear the Lord, you who seek the Lord, praise him. Right? So it's addressed, there's the call, the address of the congregation and the call of praise. So addressing God, addressing congregation. Then you get the address of God with a promise of votive offering. Now the votive offering is the promise of praise. You know, you vow to praise, but then you also vow to hold a praise meal. A meal of praise, a great Eucharistic meal. Now this is ambiguous. It's spoken about the guests. It's not clear who's addressed. May they do something, or they will do something. Can be either promise or a invitation to a banquet. From that, then we get this basic structure. There are 5 parts. You get a step up of 3 parts of the lament, kind of that step up, and then you get the double step vow at the end. Can you see the way it works? There's a 2-stage promise after a 3-stage lament. The first lament, 2 to 6, now this is Hebrew again. It begins with a complaint to God about his remoteness. The fact that he's abandoned the psalmist and he's remote from him, removed himself from him. This is contrasted with the confession of faith in God as Israel's deliverer and as the one who hears Israel's prayer. Now what's the irony? You heard their prayer, but you're not hearing mine. Classical lament. This is what you do, or you're promised to do, and this is what I experience. That dissonance, that contradiction. Then you get the second lament, which focuses on the mockery of the sufferer, the person who suffers abandonment by God, by the psalmist. So the first is the focus on God's abandonment, and what's filled the space when God's abandoned him is this rubbishing, ridicule, mockery by the whole human race and by the nation. Notice it's beyond an individual thing. Then this is followed by a confession of faith to God about the fact that he once provided for him. Now, it's not so much you did this for my ancestors, but you're not doing it for me now. What's the contrast? You once did this for me, but you are doing nothing for me now. So the contrast is not between the psalmist and the nation, but God's dealings with the psalmist in the past and his dealings in the present. And that then culminates in the petition for an end to God's remoteness, picking up that point. And can you see that's a bit unexpected? I would have expected a prayer for the end of the mockery, but it goes back to this and ties this back there. Then you get the third lament in 2 stages. There's the lament of menace from wild animals and of God himself, who is his enemy. And then there's the menace of evil people with their dogs. And then finally you get the prayer, the invocation, 5 petitions to God for help. Quite a crescendo there of prayer. And then you get the vows of praise. There's the first vow, the promise of praise, a great act of praise in the liturgical assembly, with the invitation for the whole liturgical assembly, not just some people, to join with him in praising God. So to join in praising God, not to join in thanking God, but to join in praising God. This is something that shows what God is like. Not just what God has done or what God has given, but what God is like. So praise for the deliverance, not of Israel, but of the psalmist, strangely. And then you get the second vow, the promise of a votive offering, not only of praise, but then also of a banquet, a sacred banquet, a holy meal at the temple. And then you get the invitation of people to participate, not just as praise singers to join in the praise, but to participate in this meal that is hosted by the psalmist in the presence of God. Okay, now, any questions on that? Okay, let's go through the various sections. First of all, just the translation here. Let me put things around. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I call by day, but you do not answer, and by night without relief. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One, the praise of Israel. In you our fathers trusted, they trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried for help, and they were saved. In you they trusted, and they were not disappointed. By the way, here in this verse, you get the foundational text for charismatic worship of the new ilk, which focuses around praise singing, and it's focused on a mistranslation of this verse. You are enthroned upon, you are holy, and you are enthroned as the Holy One upon the praises of Israel. You understand that? Now, you need to see that this is a key text for the whole Hillsong liturgy, which is now swept across Christendom. Now, can I just give you a side? What is their basic premise? Their basic premise is that God is enthroned or present in the praises of his people. So praise singing is kind of sacramental. But instead of sacramental by which God comes to us, it's sacramental in the sense it's the means by which we go up the ladder from earth into heaven. So praise singing is heavenly tripping. You're filled with the Spirit, and the Spirit produces praises, and the more you praise, the more you're filled with the Spirit. And what does the Spirit do? Lifts up your spirits, leaves your body behind, so that you stand before the heavenly throne and present your offerings to God in heaven. Sorry, reverse Jacob's ladder. Now, this is a foundational text for that whole theology, which you will come across and find it's very, very difficult to combat because it connects so strongly with very powerful experiences, and like all movements in the church, contains an element of truth. But what's interesting about that is that there's very little or no place for Jesus. It's Spirit-Father stuff. It's unmediated access to God, and it is discarnate. access to God. There's no need for an incarnation here, except to deliver as the Holy Spirit, but once you have the Spirit, then the incarnation loses its significance. Yes, instead of Christ leading us astray. And instead of, by the way, this is a good psalm about theology of praise singing, but not if you take that verse from the whole psalm. Okay, now let's look at the exegesis here of this astonishing thing. First of all, the psalm begins with a lament with a complaint about God's remoteness, his abandonment of the psalmist. And you need to take this in its fullest possible sense. The two ideas: God is remote in the sense that he's not just distant and uninterested, but he has abandoned, forsaken the person to whom he had committed himself. So the picture here is not just of a remote husband with a wife, he's occupied elsewhere, not listening, but a husband who deliberately walks out on his wife. See the two different kinds of remoteness. It's that kind of remoteness. Now, what's interesting is right at the beginning, God is not addressed as Yahweh, but as my God. El, which is the term, which is not a name in the Old Testament, but in the ancient world was the name given to the head of the Canaanite pantheism. El or El is the high God in Canaanite theology. This is used not as a name, but generically, God. Now notice, and therefore it has an impersonal sense about him. So here the psalmist doesn't address God as Lord, personal name, but the general name, my God. But notice the terms, it's still my God. It's not, oh God, El, but my God. That doesn't come through in translation, but any Jewish person hearing this would be struck by it, or any person who's sensitive to Hebrew. Now the picture here of the psalmist is of a roaring lion, not a lion who roars in order to warn people, but a lion who's wounded and can't move and roars with pain and agony. A wounded lion, a dying lion. Now, the complaint has to do with the question, the reason for abandonment. Now, need to think of, and this is very, very important for caring people spiritually, there's certain times and occasions where you can feel that God is justified in turning his back on you, giving you the cold shoulder. If you've done wrong, if you've sinned against him, done something terrible, then it's understandable, and you know why God has abandoned you. But where does the question, why have you abandoned me, arise? And you need to see what lies behind it. What kind of person, in what kind of situation says, my God, why have you abandoned me?
Someone undeservedly is being...
Say it loudly, please.
Someone that's been undeservedly accused or undeservedly being turned away from.
Yes, somebody who is suffering and being attacked undeservedly, and maybe even threatened with death that they do not deserve. Somebody who's experiencing injustice, even though they are innocent. So what's assumed here is innocence. So the reason, the psalmist wants to know the reason why God has abandoned him, because if you know the reason, then you can know what to do. You know why you're suffering. Now notice the extent of the abandonment. First of all is, if you like, spatial. God is remote from his trouble. Now, the teaching of the Old Testament is that God is closest to his people precisely in what situation? in their troubles. He joins them in their troubles. That's the kind of God he is. But here you have this situation where God deliberately disconnects himself from the trouble of the psalmist. And notice then the spatial extent of the abandonment. It's not just being abandoned in a part of the time, but all day and all night, despite appeals for help, God remains silent. And then the psalmist's disappointment in God is, if you like, fueled or accentuated by his faith in God. And the fact that God's treatment of him contradicts the experience of the people of Israel in the past. They trusted in the Lord, they cried for help, and whenever they cried for help, what did God do? He saved them. Right, can you see now? There's a deep disappointment here and anger against God because God has not only abandoned him, but has refused to answer his cry for help. Now, if God normally did that, you could accept it. But if in all cases in the past God heard prayers and you're the only one that God hasn't heard, can you see that accentuates the pain and the suffering? And their praise was that God was a holy God. Okay? Their praise, you were enthroned as the Holy One. The praises of Israel, the object of Israel's praises. That in hearing their prayers and in delivering them, God demonstrated his holiness. He acted in holiness. He acted in holiness by dealing with sin, impurity in an appropriate way, but also then by saving his holy people. Since he is holy, he shares his holiness with his people. His holiness protects them against their enemies and all evil. That's, if you like, the story of Israel's praise, is about the fact that he is a holy God who protects them and saves them from evil. And the question arises then in the mind of the psalmist, has he in fact misplaced his trust in God? And to make matters worse, this is the message that he gets from all around him. Near, you trusted in God. See? You're an idiot. Okay, we go to the next section there. You enthroned, in you our fathers trusted, they trusted in you, delivered them. They cried to you for help and they were saved. They trusted and were not disappointed. Now comes the next lament down to here. But I'm a maggot. Very dirty, unclean. It's not just a grub, a nice little grub, but this is ugly, unclean, a maggot and not a man. Scorned by humanity and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They curl their lips, they wag their heads. He rolled it over to Yahweh. He committed his cause. He committed himself to Yahweh. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, since he delights on him. Yet you cut me from the womb, entrusting me to the breasts of my mother. From the womb of my mother you've been my God. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near. God far, trouble near. Notice the spatial imagery there, and there's no one to help. Now, the basic suffering here is not physical suffering, but if you like, social, psychological suffering. The picture that the psalmist has of himself is that he is something unclean and loathsome, like a maggot, a grub, that you reject, that you scorn, that you want to have nothing to do with. Now, the basic suffering comes from public disgrace, public scorn, which comes to him in three forms. First of all, you get verbal ridicule. verbal ridicule, the verbal mockery. The second kind of scorn is pulling faces at him. Right? Instead of friendly face, the contemptuous face. And then the last one is wagging heads. Now the first two we can understand. Ridicule is still common. We have our gestures of contempt. You can read a person's face if they just think you're an idiot. You know, some sort of grimacing of the face. But wagging of heads is a more culturally specific. And it's not this, it's not nodding, but it's this. Wagging like that. The gesture that we have for us would be something like this. It's a recoiling. You wag your head to ward off bad luck. And you don't want to have something to do with them because they are kind of thing. It's the recoiling. It's not just unclean, but if you have anything to do with it, it's bad luck. So it's sort of warding off something evil. And very often it had to do with not just evil people, but it has a spiritual, sort of supernatural dimension to it. You wag your heads at somebody whom you think is something demonic or something really, say, sorcery or something like that. Ugh, kind of stuff. Now, the focus of their ridicule is very interesting. What they do is take the psalmist's own words and they chuck them back in his face. And they seek to destroy not his public reputation, but they don't mock him, but they mock his faith in God. Now, what was the cliche that the psalmist said over and over again? Which is to roll things over to the Lord, commit things to the Lord, and he'll help you. Now they take those words of the psalmist and they throw them back at his face in mockery to him. So they take his words to turn things over to the God who delights in those who trust him. That's his, if you like, personal confession of faith. So the implication here is that if what he said is true, if he's suffering, then this proves that God doesn't delight in him, and it proves that he has no faith in God. Notice the ambiguity. Since he delights in him, could be either the psalmist delights in him or God delights in him. Just look at it closely in terms of very clever mockery. But the important thing is it's not mockery of the person as a person. Now, Kleinig, you're a such and such. But it's mockery of the psalmist's faith. Misplaced faith in God. So it's mockery of faith. And that's the deepest cause of suffering.
Who is it that's mocking? I've lost track of, in a theocracy, who's doing the mocking?
Well, these people here who are the mockers.
No, I understand the mockers, but...
We don't know. That's all who see me. This is very funny because it goes beyond, it's hard to pin down. I'm a worm, not a man, scorned by Adam. Adam means all people, humanity. So the whole human race scorns me and despised by the people of God. So rejected by humanity and despised by the whole people. And this focuses then in that threefold mockery. All who see me, see the suffering of this person, mock at him, curl lips, wag their heads, and their mockery is, he rolled it over to Yahweh, let him, Yahweh, deliver him. Let him rescue him, that's Yahweh, rescue him, since he delights in him, double sense, since Yahweh delights in him, if Yahweh delights in him, let him deliver him. Or if the psalmist really delights in God, then let God deliver him. That's that double sense. Can you see it's rather mysterious? These people are not even named as enemies as elsewhere in the psalm. These are witnesses of this person's suffering. It is very strange, very mysterious. Okay, this culminates in two things, then a confession of faith. The picture is of God as the midwife who either delivers the psalmist as a baby from his mother's womb, or is the doctor who performs the caesarean on the mother to deliver him. And the psalmist has not only been delivered by God at birth, but has always, the psalmist has always relied in God from birth until now. So the emphasis here is on God's commitment to this psalmist from birth. And then this culminates in a petition for help. There's no human helper, and so the only hope for help is God himself in this desperate situation. And notice initially there's no specific plea for deliverance. All that the psalmist does is, please end your remoteness. Start listening to me. Which, if you like, is a very minimal request. How's it going? Yes, let's have a break and then we'll finish the psalm after the break.